"Mom, I think it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding." I read the text message 3 times before I finally set my phone down on the kitchen table. At 72 years old, I thought I had experienced every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I had buried my husband. I had struggled through years of raising a child alone after cancer took him too early. I had worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and postponed my own dreams so my daughter could have opportunities one never did. Yet somehow, those 14 words hurt more than I wanted to admit. The morning sunlight spilled through the window above my sink, casting long shadows across the countertops I had spent the previous afternoon cleaning. A pot of coffee sat nearby, growing cold. I had poured myself a cup 20 minutes earlier, but I hadn't taken a single sip. My eyes remained fixed on the screen. The message was from Vanessa, my daughter, my only child, the same daughter whose wedding I had been helping plan for nearly a year. The same daughter whose dream venue I had agreed to pay for after she told me it was the one place she had imagined since she was a little girl. The venue overlooking the river. The one with white columns, crystal chandeliers, and manicured gardens. The one that required a $50,000 payment before the final contract could be completed. A payment I had not sent yet. I picked up my phone again, hoping I had misunderstood something. Maybe there was another message explaining the situation. Maybe there was a joke I wasn't seeing. Maybe Vanessa had sent the text while stressed and would immediately call to apologize. But there was nothing else. No explanation. No apology. No follow-up. Just silence. I stared out the window toward my backyard. The roses were blooming beautifully that summer. My late husband, Michael, had planted most of them years ago. Every season, they returned stronger than before. I used to think families worked the same way. I used to believe love, patience, and sacrifice always came back eventually. Lately, I wasn't so sure. Looking back, the signs had been there. Vanessa had become distant over the past few months. Phone calls grew shorter. Conversations became transactional. Whenever I asked about wedding plans, she seemed irritated instead of excited. I convinced myself she was overwhelmed. Wedding planning could do that to people. At least that was what I kept telling myself. I remembered standing beside her at the venue 6 months earlier. She had wrapped her arms around me and thanked me for making her dream wedding possible. I remembered how her eyes filled with tears when she talked about walking down the aisle. I remembered believing every word she said. Now I wondered how much of it had been real. My phone remained silent. The clock above the refrigerator ticked steadily. Every second felt louder than the last. Finally, I stood and walked toward the dining room. On top of the sideboard sat a leather folder containing contracts, receipts, and notes from nearly a year of wedding preparations. I opened it slowly. There it was, the final payment information, $50,000, due in 3 days. I ran my fingers across the paperwork and felt an unfamiliar calm settling over me. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. If my own daughter truly did not want me at her wedding, then perhaps there were decisions that needed to be reconsidered. I returned to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and read the message one final time. Then I placed it face down on the table. I never replied. Instead, I looked toward the leather folder resting in the next room and realized that Vanessa wasn't the only person with a choice left to make. I did not sleep much that night. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak that old homes make after midnight. I sat in the living room with a blanket across my lap and stared at the framed photographs lining the shelves. Most of them were pictures of Vanessa. There she was at 8 years old holding a soccer trophy almost as large as she was. There she was at her high school graduation, smiling so hard her cheeks looked sore. There she was standing beside me on the day she received her college diploma. I remembered every sacrifice behind those photographs. I remembered working extra shifts at the hospital gift shop after my regular hours. I remembered clipping coupons, delaying repairs on my car, and wearing the same winter coat for nearly a decade because tuition payments came first. At the time, none of it felt like a burden. She was my daughter. Helping her build a future felt as natural as breathing. The next morning, I carried my coffee onto the back patio. The air was cool, and the roses swayed gently in the breeze. For a few minutes, I convinced myself there had been some misunderstanding. Perhaps Vanessa would call. Perhaps she would explain that emotions were running high and that she had sent the message without thinking. Instead, my phone remained silent. Around noon, I opened my email and found another wedding invoice. The subject line read, "Final venue payment reminder." I stared at it for several seconds before opening the attachment. $50,000. The number sat there in black ink as calmly as if nothing had changed. I closed the email and looked across the yard. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. 6 months earlier, Vanessa and I had toured the venue together. She had walked through the ballroom with tears in her eyes. She talked about the first dance, the flowers, the photographs, and the guests she wanted to celebrate with. At one point, she stopped beside a large window overlooking the river and squeezed my hand. She told me she could not imagine doing any of it without me. The memory felt different now, like a photograph fading in the sun. Later that afternoon, my friend Evelyn called. She immediately noticed something was wrong. I tried to sound normal, but she had known me for more than 40 years. After a few minutes, I told her about the message. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she asked a simple question. Had Vanessa explained why? I realized she had not. No reason, no conversation, no attempt to discuss it face to face. Just a message. Evelyn sighed softly. Then she said something I could not stop thinking about afterward. People usually reveal who they are when they believe they no longer need anything from you. After we hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. The same table where Vanessa used to do homework. As a child, the same table where birthday cakes had been cut and holiday meals had been shared. I looked at my phone one more time. No apology had arrived. No explanation. Nothing. For the first time, a question began forming in my mind. If Vanessa truly did not want me standing beside her on the most important day of her life, why had she spent months making sure I paid for every part of it? And the more I thought about that question, the harder it became to ignore. The following morning, I decided to stop guessing and start paying attention. For months, I had explained away every uncomfortable feeling, every delayed phone call, every awkward conversation, every moment when Vanessa seemed more interested in what I could provide than in spending time with me. I told myself she was busy. I told myself wedding planning was stressful. I told myself not to take things personally. But once that message arrived, it was as if a fog had lifted. Suddenly, details I had ignored began arranging themselves into a picture I could no longer avoid. That afternoon, I drove to a small cafe downtown where I often met friends. I ordered tea and sat near the window. While I waited, I found myself scrolling through old photographs from the past year. There were dozens from venue tours, cake tastings, floral consultations, and planning meetings. In almost every picture, Vanessa was smiling. Yet as I looked closer, something felt strange. Most of the smiles appeared when vendors were present, when contracts were being discussed, when payments were being made. I searched for photographs of quieter moments. Simple lunches, family visits, casual afternoons. There were very few. The realization left a hollow feeling in my chest. My phone buzzed unexpectedly. For a brief second, I thought it might be Vanessa. Instead, it was a notification from social media. A new photo had been posted. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed Vanessa had been tagged. I opened the image. It showed a group of women gathered around a restaurant table celebrating a bridal event. Everyone looked happy. Glasses were raised. Decorations filled the room. What caught my attention was not the picture itself. It was the caption beneath it. One of Vanessa's friends had written, "So excited for the wedding. It is finally becoming the luxury event Vanessa always dreamed of." I stared at those words. Luxury event. Something about the phrase lingered in my mind. Not wedding, not marriage, not family. Luxury event. I continued reading comments. Most were harmless. Then I noticed one reply from another guest. "Worth every penny, especially since someone else is paying." The comment included a laughing emoji. My stomach tightened. Perhaps it was a joke. Perhaps I was reading too much into it. Yet the timing felt impossible to ignore. I set my phone down and looked out the window. Cars moved through the intersection outside. People hurried along the sidewalks carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Life continued normally for everyone else. Meanwhile, I felt as though I had stepped into a version of reality I had been refusing to see. Later that evening, I returned home and opened the wedding folder again. I reviewed every invoice, every contract, every receipt. The numbers were staggering. Venue deposits, catering advances, floral arrangements, transportation services. Most of it had come directly from my savings. Money that took years to build. Money my late husband and I had carefully planned for retirement. As I sat there reviewing the documents, another thought surfaced. Vanessa never once asked whether I could afford any of it. She only asked whether I would pay. The distinction suddenly mattered. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light stretched across the backyard, illuminating Michael's roses. I thought about the values he had spent his life teaching our daughter. Gratitude, respect, integrity. Somewhere along the way, those lessons seemed to have been replaced by something else. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether the wedding was not revealing a new version of Vanessa at all. Perhaps it was simply revealing the version that had been there much longer than I wanted to believe. The next day, I found myself thinking less about the wedding and more about the years that had led to this moment. Sometimes the truth does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it appears slowly, hidden inside memories you have carried for decades. I spent the morning organizing old boxes in the hallway closet. It was something I had been meaning to do for months. Inside were school drawings, report cards, birthday cards, and photographs from nearly every stage of Vanessa's life. I sat on the floor surrounded by memories and realized how much of my life had revolved around making sure hers would be easier. After Michael passed away, there were days when I was terrified. Not for myself, for her. She was only 12. I worried about every bill, every tuition payment, every unexpected expense. There were years when I barely bought anything for myself. If there was extra money, it went toward Vanessa. If there was extra time, it belonged to Vanessa. Looking back, I never regretted those choices. A parent does not keep score. At least, I never did. Yet as I sorted through those boxes, certain memories began standing out. Small moments I had ignored at the time. Moments that suddenly felt different. I remembered helping Vanessa purchase her first apartment. She had thanked me warmly when the paperwork was signed. A few weeks later, she barely mentioned it again. I remembered co-signing a loan when she wanted to start a business. She had promised we would celebrate together once everything succeeded. The celebration happened. I was not invited. At the time, I convinced myself it was an oversight. Now I was not so sure. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store. While waiting in line, I noticed a mother and daughter shopping together. They were laughing about something small, nothing remarkable. Yet the sight stayed with me during the drive home. Somewhere over the years, Vanessa and I had stopped sharing those simple moments. Every conversation had become connected to a need, a request, a plan, or a transaction. The relationship had become practical instead of personal. When I arrived home, I checked my mailbox. Inside was a stack of advertisements and a bridal magazine addressed to Vanessa. She had used my address for several wedding deliveries. I carried everything inside and placed it on the counter. As I looked at the magazine, another realization settled over me. Vanessa had involved me in every payment, every invoice, every contract, every financial decision. Yet somehow I had been excluded from the actual celebration. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner and ate alone in the dining room. The house felt unusually quiet. I glanced toward the empty chair where Michael used to sit and wondered what he would have thought about all of this. He always had a way of seeing through situations faster than I could. He would listen carefully, remain silent for a few moments, and then ask one question that revealed everything. As I washed the dishes later that night, his imaginary question finally came to me. If someone values your money more than your presence, what exactly are they celebrating? I stood there staring at the running water. For the first time since receiving that message, I felt something stronger than sadness. It was not anger, it was understanding. And understanding can change everything. 2 days remained before the final payment deadline. I woke early and spent the morning tending the roses in the backyard. The routine helped clear my mind. For years, whenever life became complicated, I found comfort in simple tasks. Watering plants, folding laundry, organizing shelves. Small things that reminded me I still had control over something. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed a name I recognized immediately. Rachel Bennett, the wedding planner. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Her voice was cheerful and professional. She asked how I was doing and then moved directly into wedding business. She wanted to confirm that the final venue payment would be arriving on schedule. I listened quietly. Rachel spoke as if everything were perfectly normal, as if I were still expected to attend every rehearsal, every photograph, every celebration. When she finished speaking, I asked a simple question. Rachel, does everyone know I am no longer invited? The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Finally, she laughed softly, assuming I was joking. When I explained that I was completely serious, her tone changed immediately. She sounded confused, then concerned. She told me she had never heard anything about that. According to every schedule, seating chart, and planning document, I remained one of the most important guests. My grip tightened around the phone. Rachel continued speaking. She explained that Vanessa had recently finalized several details, but removing me had never been discussed. Not once. After we ended the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The conversation revealed something important. This situation was not being handled openly. Vanessa had not informed the venue. She had not informed the planner. She had not informed the vendors. She had simply informed me. The realization unsettled me more than I expected. If she truly believed her decision was reasonable, why hide it? That afternoon, another thought began bothering me. Daniel. Throughout the entire engagement, he had always treated me kindly. He called on holidays. He helped carry groceries when he visited. He never struck me as someone who would support excluding a parent without explanation. Yet I had no idea whether he even knew what had happened. I considered calling him several times. Each time, I stopped myself. I did not want to create drama. I did not want to interfere in their relationship. But I also could not ignore the growing feeling that important pieces of the story were missing. Later that evening, I opened my email again. Another reminder from the venue had arrived. The payment deadline was approaching quickly. Attached to the message was a summary of the reservation. I reviewed every line carefully. The ballroom, the gardens, the catering package, the riverfront terrace. Everything depended upon the final payment being completed. I closed the document and stared at the dark screen. For months, I had viewed the money as a gift, a contribution to my daughter's future happiness. Now the situation looked different. Gifts are given freely. They are not extracted through silence, secrecy, and exclusion. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the yard. I thought about Rachel's confusion. I thought about the questions that remained unanswered. Most of all, I thought about how many people seemed to believe I would be standing proudly at that wedding while only one person had decided otherwise. And for the first time, I began considering whether Daniel deserved to know the truth before anyone else did. The following morning, I made a decision that had felt impossible only a few days earlier. I was going to stop assuming things and start asking questions. Not accusations, not confrontations, just questions. After breakfast, I found Daniel's number in my contacts and stared at it for several minutes. I had known him for almost 3 years. During that time, he had always been respectful, thoughtful, steady. If he knew about Vanessa's decision, then I would accept that reality. If he did not, then he deserved the opportunity to hear the truth. My finger hovered over the call button before I finally pressed it. Daniel answered on the third ring. He sounded cheerful, relaxed, completely unaware that anything was wrong. We exchanged a few pleasantries before I asked if he had time to meet for coffee. There was a brief pause. Then he agreed immediately. 2 hours later, we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe near the river. Sunlight reflected off the water outside the windows. People walked past carrying shopping bags and iced drinks. It looked like an ordinary afternoon, yet my heart felt unusually heavy. Daniel smiled and asked how wedding preparations were going. The question almost made me laugh. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee and asked him something else. Daniel, if someone told your mother she was not welcome at your wedding, how would you feel? His smile disappeared instantly. He looked confused, then concerned. What do you mean? He asked. I held his gaze for a moment before answering. Vanessa sent me a message 3 days ago. She told me not to come. For several seconds, he said nothing. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to shock. That cannot be right, he said quietly. There must be some misunderstanding. I pulled out my phone and handed it to him. He read the message once, then again. His jaw tightened, slightly. When he finally looked up, the color had drained from his face. I did not know about this, he said. I swear to you, Carol, I had absolutely no idea. Something inside me settled at that moment. Not because the situation was fixed. It was not. But because one question had finally been answered. Daniel had not been part of the decision. We talked for nearly an hour. He asked careful questions. I answered honestly. I told him about the planner's reaction, the silence, the lack of explanation, the payment deadline approaching. Through it all, Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. He looked like a man trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. Before we left, he asked one final question. "Have you spoken to Vanessa since the message?" I shook my head. "No." He nodded slowly. Then he said something that stayed with me during the drive home. "There are things I need to understand." That evening, I sat alone on my back patio watching the sunset paint the sky shades of gold and orange. My phone remained silent. No call, no explanation, no apology. But somewhere across town, difficult conversations were finally beginning. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I had the unmistakable feeling that a truth much larger than a wedding invitation was about to come to the surface. The next morning was the payment deadline. I woke before sunrise and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that quickly grew cold beside me. The house was silent. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not because the situation had improved, but because uncertainty was beginning to disappear. Questions that had haunted me were finally receiving answers. Daniel had not known. Rachel had not known. The vendors had not known. The only person who had decided I should disappear from the celebration was Vanessa. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was the venue's accounting department. The woman on the line spoke politely and explained that they were calling to verify the status of the final payment before processing the next stage of the contract. I thanked her for reaching out and asked a few questions. What would happen if the payment did not arrive? How long would the reservation remain active? What portions of the agreement depended upon that final transfer? She answered each question professionally. When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I opened my banking application and reviewed the pending payment instructions one final time. $50,000. Years of savings. Years of careful planning. Money that represented countless mornings, late shifts, and sacrifices. I stared at the screen and thought about something Evelyn had told me. People reveal who they are when they believe they no longer need anything from you. Perhaps she was right. Because the moment Vanessa believed the wedding was secure, my presence suddenly became optional. My support remained welcome. My attendance did not. A little after noon, another call arrived. This time it was Daniel. His voice sounded exhausted. We spoke briefly. He did not share details about his conversation with Vanessa, but he did tell me one thing. The discussion had not gone well. According to him, several truths had surfaced that neither of us expected. He thanked me for being honest with him. Then he apologized for something he had not personally done. That apology meant more than he probably realized. After we hung up, I walked into the dining room where the wedding folder still sat on the sideboard. I opened it slowly. Contract after contract filled the pages. Every document represented trust. Every signature represented commitment. Yet trust only works when both sides value it. I closed the folder and carried it back to the kitchen. Then I picked up the phone and called my bank. The representative verified my information and asked how she could assist me. My response was simple. I wanted to cancel the scheduled payment. She confirmed the request and processed it while I waited on the line. The entire conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no arguments, no celebration, just silence. A quiet, peaceful silence. For days, I had been carrying the weight of someone else's decision. In that moment, I finally made one of my own. Late that afternoon, Rachel called again. Her voice sounded noticeably different this time. The venue had been notified that the payment would not be arriving. Certain reservations were now being paused until the matter could be resolved. I listened carefully and thanked her for keeping me informed. After we ended the call, I stepped outside onto the patio. The air felt lighter somehow. Across town, I knew difficult conversations were unfolding. Plans were changing. Assumptions were collapsing. And for the first time since receiving that message, the consequences of Vanessa's choice were no longer theoretical. They had become very real. The following 48 hours felt unlike anything I had experienced before. I did not receive a call from Vanessa. Not immediately. Instead, information arrived from other directions. Rachel called twice to clarify logistical questions. Vendors were requesting updates. Timelines were being revised. Deposits were being reviewed. The carefully organized machine that had seemed unstoppable only a week earlier was suddenly struggling to move forward. Through all of it, I remained surprisingly calm. I was not celebrating. I was not trying to cause problems. I was simply refusing to finance an event from which I had been excluded. On the second morning, Daniel called again. This time his voice carried a heaviness that had not been there before. We met at the same cafe near the river. When he arrived, he looked tired. Not angry, just disappointed. We sat down, and after a few moments of silence, he told me what had happened. His conversations with Vanessa had revealed far more than either of us expected. At first, she insisted she was only trying to avoid tension. Then the explanations began changing. One reason became another, then another. Eventually, pieces of the truth started emerging. According to Daniel, Vanessa had become increasingly concerned about appearances. The guest list, the photographs, the image she wanted to present. Somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that certain people fit that image better than others. Hearing those words should have hurt. Strangely, they did not. By then, I already suspected something similar. What surprised me was what came next. Daniel explained that several disagreements had surfaced between them regarding other guests as well. Family members, friends, even people who had supported them throughout the engagement. It was not just about me. The closer the wedding became, the more relationships seemed to revolve around status, presentation, and control. As he spoke, I noticed how saddened he looked. This was not the future he thought he was building. After we finished talking, I drove home and spent the afternoon working in the garden. The roses needed trimming. Fallen leaves needed clearing. The physical work helped organize my thoughts. For days, I had focused on what Vanessa had done. Now I found myself thinking about why. Somewhere between gratitude and entitlement, something had shifted. Somewhere between receiving help and expecting it, a line had disappeared. Late that evening, my phone finally rang. Vanessa. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Her voice sounded strained. She did not begin with an apology. She began with questions about the venue, about the payment, about the contracts. I listened quietly. Then I asked a simple question. Vanessa, are you calling because you miss your mother or because you miss the money? The silence that followed was longer than any argument could have been. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she ended the call. I set my phone down and walked onto the patio. The air was cool. The sky was turning orange as the sun disappeared behind the trees. For the first time, I realized something important. The crisis surrounding the wedding was no longer about canceled payments or venue contracts. It was about character. And once character becomes visible, it is very difficult to pretend it was hidden all along. 3 weeks later, the situation looked very different from what anyone had imagined at the beginning of the summer. The wedding had not disappeared, but it had changed. Plans were scaled back. Expensive arrangements were replaced with simpler ones. Some guests chose not to attend. Others remained supportive. Life moved forward the way it always does when reality finally replaces fantasy. During those weeks, I heard very little from Vanessa. The silence no longer bothered me. In fact, it gave me something I had not experienced in a long time: peace. I spent my days working in the garden, meeting friends for lunch, and reconnecting with parts of myself that had been neglected for years. For so long, I had measured my value by how much I could give to other people. Now I was beginning to understand that love and self-respect were not the same thing. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by the house unexpectedly. He carried a small box of pastries from a bakery I liked. We sat on the patio overlooking the roses while the afternoon sun warmed the yard. He looked more relaxed than he had during our recent conversations. At one point, he thanked me again for being honest with him. Then he shared something I would never forget. He said the crisis had forced many difficult conversations that should have happened long before the engagement. Conversations about priorities, expectations, character, accountability. The kind of conversations that determine whether a relationship is built on something real. Before leaving, he told me that regardless of what happened next, he hoped I knew how much he respected me. After he drove away, I sat quietly for a long time. Sometimes respect arrives from unexpected places. A few days later, my phone rang. This time it was Vanessa. Her voice sounded different. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. For several moments, neither of us knew what to say. Then she apologized. Not with excuses, not with explanations. An actual apology. She admitted that she had become consumed by appearances and expectations. She admitted that she stopped seeing people as individuals and started viewing them as pieces of a perfect image she was trying to create. Most importantly, she admitted that she had hurt me. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was silence between us. Finally, I told her the truth. The money had never been the issue. The venue had never been the issue. What mattered was being treated like a person instead of a resource, a mother instead of a wallet, a family member instead of an inconvenience. I could hear emotion in her voice when she responded. For the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter again. Healing did not happen instantly. Trust rarely works that way. But a door that had been closed was finally open. Months later, when I think back on everything that happened, I do not remember the contracts, the invoices, or the canceled payment. I remember the lesson. Love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. Generosity without respect eventually becomes expectation. And family relationships survive not because money solves problems, but because people choose gratitude over entitlement. The roses Michael planted continue to bloom every year. They remind me that healthy things require care, honesty, and patience. Families are no different. Sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is refuse to support behavior that damages the very relationships everyone claims to value. In the end, I did not lose my daughter. I simply stopped losing myself.